All right, I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for your interest in this session today. I'm going to be talking about the Information Management Code Registry, which is a resource that has been in development for a couple years now, and we now have it in a beta state, and we want to share with you kind of the core attributes of the project and where it's heading, and so forth. Hello. And it's essentially a registry of information management software, a curated list that we are going to be releasing to the community to easily find information management solutions to information management issues. I'm Colin Smith, and my co-conspirator is Kristen Vanderbilt. And might be kind of hard to see from back there, but we have a community notes document. It's a bit.ly. It's bit.ly/IMCR-notes. And while maybe not important right now, it will be later on in the session, and I'll have that link up here on the slides again later. Okay. So, quick overview of the session today. I'm going to be providing first an introduction to the Information Management Code Registry, talking about the scope and the goals of the project, and then providing a report out on the activities that we've been engaged with for the last year and where the project stands. And then we'll have kind of a group participation effort and a series of activities at the end in which we hope to collect feedback on this resource before moving to the final sort of production release of it out there to the world. So the importance of your feedback and comments here is greatly appreciated, and we will be taking that into consideration before going live. So central to enhancing the use and value of Earth science data, which is the ESIP annual theme, are good information management practices. And the Information Management Code Registry works to this end by facilitating discovery and use of software solutions for information management needs. And while large research groups tend to have IM expertise, just by the nature of the scale of their funding, there are a lot of small research groups that need IM expertise. Kristen and I both work for the Environmental Data Initiative, and this is one of our core goals, is to help elevate IM expertise throughout the environmental and ecological community, because these are the people that are having these sorts of expectations. There's increasing expectations on these people from funders, and also just from the research community as a whole, producing openly available and reusable data packages that are of high quality and could be used in the future. And so these are the groups that we're really targeting with this resource. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So the scope of this project is really providing software for IM tasks, whether run from a user's local machine or accessed via web services, or through a website. We emphasize open source software that is freely accessible and community supported, while not excluding proprietary software, recognizing that there are some really powerful tools out there and proprietary sources are sometimes the best way to go. And again, we're emphasizing the small teams. We're focused on the needs of individuals and small research groups working in the earth sciences domain, which is very broad. The work that Kristen and I and other people in our community have been working on is more of the ecological environmental science domain, but really we're talking about earth sciences very, very generally here. And the goals of this project are first and foremost to accelerate IM tasks, to simplify discovery and use of software through a comprehensive registry that's searchable by task, software language, and science domain, and quickly returning high-level information about software that facilitates this fitness for use assessment. Facilitating development is kind of our secondary or more ancillary goal, is that by creating this curated registry, there's a lot of information that we may be able to glean from it that could inform future development. So this goal is to highlight new opportunities by identifying coverage gaps and openly discussing and recording community ideas and organizing hackathons and other sorts of development efforts to get these tools online and available to folks. Even just achieving the first goal would provide a lot of service and some really great benefits of reproducible science, converging on best practices for information management, accelerating that task that again is kind of a new requirement for people so that they can have time to do other things that are more important to them, or maybe not more important, but other important tasks. So there are a lot of benefits that kind of come along with just achieving that first goal. And the second, we feel like there's opportunities there, which we'll be exploring a little bit later. So now I'll give you a condensed report of where the project stands. We'll talk about the implementation of the registry, the curation activities that have gone on to date, how to discover software in the registry, a little bit about maintenance, some of the challenges that we're confronted with that and how we plan to address them, as well as engaging the community and which is related to one, just using, recognizing this as a resource, and two, also this kind of ties into developing new tools and that sort of thing that I just spoke about. So implementation of the registry is in OntoSoft, which provides a robust, enriched science software ontology and a human-friendly interface to search and discovery. OntoSoft is a project of EarthCube. It's been around for several years. It's in a stable state. There are a lot of communities that use it to document software for workflows, also just to expose it for discovery purposes. And this was where we chose to implement because it's a great resource. Again, it's easy to add to the registry as well as do searches and potentially tie into workflows and so forth. Here's an overview of the ontology. We really focus on just kind of high level information right now. So when we're going through the curation effort, we're just kind of putting in this high level information, again, to facilitate that assessment for use. So identifying the software, where to locate it, the unique name and identifier for it, keywords that come along with it, a brief description, understanding the software. So relating to domain knowledge, other software that exists in domains and what sorts of domains this software really applies to. Executing the software. That's essential information, just being able to access and download it. Getting support is critical for community discussions, as well as finding out how to maybe use the software for your particular use case, as well as file issues and so forth, as well as updates. So updating the software, how can I track the new versions that are coming out, or how can I contribute to the projects? So those are the core areas of the ontology that we're really focused on now. There's a lot more here that could expand the potential value and use of the registry, but to date we haven't really been populating those metadata fields. But perhaps some of these we should really be focusing on, and we could talk about that later. The curation activities to date, curation is an ongoing process involving manual discovery and metadata entry, primarily done by IMCR maintainers, though anyone is welcome to contribute. We have been, if you want to contribute, it's very easy to set up an account for yourself, and I'll show you a little bit about how that registration process looks. But we've been really kind of focusing on R at the beginning, because that's the language that we're most familiar with. But and so we've been, searching through CRAN and R Open Science for IM software packages that we think are useful. And now just kind of getting into Python, searching through the massive Python package index, as well as SciPy, just kind of the R Open Science equivalent for Python. And then we plan on, extracting and curating useful software from the MathWorks file exchange as well. So if this is a view into the portal homepage, the landing page that you arrive at. On the left here is a list of software, and that just scrolls down, I don't know, 20 items per page. There's several pages. On the right, there's a little search interface, and then in the upper right-hand corner is your login and registration links there. And when once logged in, you have access to create new software metadata instances, and it's a very easy to use, form-based approach. On the left, there's this indicator, this sort of pie chart, if you will, that changes color depending on how complete the different sections of the metadata are. The example given here is that identification scope that has field for the name of the software, again, the description, keywords, and project homepage. But it's very easy to supply this information and update it if you'd like to be participating in it. But this is largely just a manual interface. To date, we have 183 software libraries, primarily focused on R and Python, and spanning a broad range of IM tasks. Here's a pie chart of the implementation languages that we have in there now. Again, you can see that R dominates. That's again the one that we're most familiar with, and we've been spending the most time with. But again, plan on putting a lot of effort into the Python here in the next little while, and then other includes everything else, Bash, Java, JavaScript, etc. Here we have a bar chart of software in the registry sorted by task. My apologies for everyone sitting beyond the first row. But the highest counts here are from the controlled vocabulary, assurance, integration, collection, describing, and then we start to get into some of the subterms: cleaning, quality control, validation, etc. And then down here at the bottom, we start to see things like calibration. There's 2 software packages, or workflow management. There's 1, and so forth. So, you know, there might be opportunities to use this information to inform coverage gaps. As registration becomes more comprehensive and the metadata fields more complete, there may be ways in which this information could be leveraged to identify new development opportunities, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And here is a word cloud of all the developers associated with these software packages. And so it's kind of a fun way to look at it, to see who are kind of the prominent names of software that fall within the scope of this project. Now for discovery, OntoSoft provides a simple and effective search interface for discovering software by core attributes. And this is again on that landing page that you saw a while back. There is a general search field there. You could also search by author. There's a particular author that you trust or that you really enjoy the work of. Keywords that are tagged to these different software items, and that are, we encourage use of controlled vocabularies to keyword software items, and we have been doing this as maintainers. The language, you could search across or filter by the particular implementation language that you're interested in, as well as the license, operating system, or the publisher of the software, if not the author themselves. So keyword searches are enhanced with a controlled vocabulary organized around the Data One research lifecycle and the common information management tasks therein. You'll notice that I think analyze is the only part of that research lifecycle that is not listed here, because we feel that's outside of the scope of this project. But we chose the research lifecycle because it's very much a familiar schema to the community in which we're trying to reach, the scientist, the small research group, etc. We're not really talking and focusing on professional data managers and data scientists, though we encourage inclusion of them in this. And so that's kind of the rationale behind our focus on the research lifecycle. There's a link to this at the bottom, and also in the community notes document, which I'll share a link with a little bit later again. So the other controlled vocabulary that we're just now beginning to use is supports discovery by science discipline using a section of the LTER controlled vocabulary. And we recognize that this is a search facet that could be very useful to folks, though recognizing that oftentimes information management tasks cross domains and so forth, but every now and then you'll have something that's very particular to a domain or discipline. So we haven't yet implemented that, but we're beginning to, we will begin doing that here shortly. Now, maintenance of the registry. To date, everything's kind of a manual thing. The OntoSoft project is, who knows how long it's going to be around. So we're thinking about maintaining this resource. And I'm not suggesting that they're not going to be around. I'm just, that's something that we all think about. So maintaining this resource into the future, I've had some recent discussions with OntoSoft and learning more about how we could do this. And we've discovered that automated maintenance of software metadata can be done through the API, and it will ensure content is current and accurate and is maintained with minimal effort. So this has not yet been implemented, but we do plan on doing this. One, for maintaining changes to the software metadata, updating tagging of terms from the controlled vocabulary, as well as just backing up the metadata resources that we're curating here. And we plan on standing up a GitHub repository in which all this information and code will live, so that it can be used to help with this maintenance process. And so using the API for these maintenance purposes could help us expand coverage and use of the OntoSoft ontology, through crosswalks and other metadata extraction algorithms. For instance, someone could supply a GitHub repository URL as like a bare minimum, and then we could run a process that would go through, harvest that information, and automatically populate the registry. So that's something that we're considering and looking into. Engagement. So beyond just advertising this as a resource, letting folks know about it, again, we're really interested in the potential of being able to highlight gaps in coverage and openly discussing and recording ideas and organizing hackathons to develop new tools that are useful for whatever the new challenges that folks are confronted with. This is something we may be able to do through a mining of the information in the metadata. We might be able to get something useful out of that. But otherwise, we kind of see ourselves in a unique position of, as curators in maintaining this resource, of kind of synthesizing, what is available and what can be done, what are some of the, also within our project, being at this interface of communicating with the community about where the practice is headed, where are the challenges, where are the new opportunities, and so forth. So just having a forum to discuss these sorts of things and log them to memory, openly and publicly, so that we can get folks kind of converging on ideas, as well as joining forces to develop software. And then actually, once an idea or a set of ideas are identified, actually implementing and doing that development, we imagine could take several forms, and we're interested to hear any ideas that you guys may have. But we've hosted a few hackathons around community-supported ideas that have been successful for the most part. This most recent one that we did on a visualization tool to visually explore data within the Data One network is really coming along, and we imagine it being generally useful to folks. But through this process, and it's very intuitive and obvious, but something that we've been learning is how effective it is to get everyone together to take part in a project and to contribute. You know, we're able to create, you know, much more than we could on our own. And so hackathons, you know, our budget is limited to support that sort of thing, but maybe there are other sources of funding in which we could set up hackathons in localities, because everywhere each of us are situated, I'm sure there are, you know, professional software developers as well as budding new software developers that want to apply their expertise, take part in a project as a learning experience, and do some collaboration. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's something that we imagine we could help drive forward and facilitate. In summary, a reminder again of the scope that we're talking about information management software, again, run from a user's local machine or accessed as a web service. We're really emphasizing freely and accessible community supported software, but not excluding proprietary sources. And again, on small teams of individuals or research groups in the earth sciences domain that don't have the formal IM expertise and training, but need it. And summarizing our report, implementation is complete in OntoSoft. The curation process is ongoing. Discovery is a simple search interface augmented by controlled vocabularies. And maintenance, though it has been manually intensive to date, we imagine or we plan on implementing some automation tasks that will ensure accuracy and reduce effort. And engagement, creating new tools as a community together. So we have a few activities that we'd like to do with you as a group. Again, this resource is something that we plan on launching and going live with here very soon. And so this is kind of a final opportunity to weigh in before we start telling everybody about, you know, what it is that we're doing. If we need to maybe incorporate some other aspects or change course a little bit or anything like that, now's the time to get that feedback. But before going into, well, let me tell you what the activities are, and then I'll open it up for comment and discussion just generally. So there's a series of questions that we have in our shared community document, which at the bottom is the bit.ly for that. And we'd like you all to kind of get together basically in like 2 large groups and discuss these questions and log these notes to file or to file and then do a little report out. So the first activity is on delineating the potential of this resource. We've shared with you kind of an overview of what we plan to do with it. In hearing this presentation today, do new or other ideas come to mind for which this resource could be valuable? The second activity or set of questions is going to be on facilitating development. And so that's addressing the what I spoke about regarding identifying gaps in coverage and then filling those gaps. How can we do that effectively? Third, I'd like you all to kind of test drive the search and discovery of the portal. You know, go in, see if you could find what you're intending to find, as well as reviewing the Information Management Code Registry controlled vocabulary. You know, does the structure make sense? Are all the terms that you expect there? Is there anything that should be removed, reorganized, etc.? And then the fourth set of questions will be on handling non-generalized code. So like alpha release code, stuff that doesn't belong to a particular software package, but may otherwise be useful for folks. So let's just open it up for general discussion and comment before getting into these activities. Does anybody have any thoughts or wanna voice anything related to what I just said? And thank you again in advance for your feedback.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about discovery within your platform. Do you have any forums for helping people discover your platform itself?
Well, not formally. I mean, we do have the Environmental Data Initiative and the scope of that project, which is really the division of environmental biology, but also, and sorry, I should clarify, Environmental Data Initiative, our primary task is to help with curation efforts. We run a data repository to ensure the long-term persistence of data, as well as providing data curation services and training. So that is sort of a platform from which we can disseminate knowledge of this resource. We do have a Slack channel, but I mean, you got to know about the project before you could get there. So I think right now we're just kind of considering the EDI as an opportunity to disseminate knowledge of this resource.
We're also sort of hoping to get some insight from you all about.
We were also hoping to get some feedback from you all about what might be good locations to kind of advertise this resource.
I have a couple questions and also suggestions as to how you can advertise it. One is I try to poke around, and when it points to GitHub, mostly these are like 3-year-old last update. Have you thought of maybe scraping the last update date and exposing this on the interface so that we don't go in follow blind Alice here?
Is this the
mostly on the Python side? That's what I looked at.
sorry, on the IMCR GitHub or the software?
The software itself.
Oh, okay. So some representation of the last of this state of activity of the software project. Yeah, that would be very useful. It would tell whether, not what state of maturity it's in, but it would say as to whether or not somebody was actively maintaining it, or
exactly.
Yeah.
Just scraping the last update and putting that in your schema would be useful.
Great.
I think it's a wonderful project. It would be very useful to connect it with the types of data it can process. So have you thought of maybe working with a data catalog where you would be able to match the software that you have with the specific types of data being published?
That's a great recommendation. There is some fields in the OntoSoft ontology that does indeed support that, the types of data that you can use with this software. And so, yeah, that makes sense to be able to maybe search by the type of data that you have that you're.
Yeah, I should say that this is a very non-trivial problem because there are many flavors of CSV files and many flavors of Excel files, as you know, and not to mention more complex structures. So it has to resolve into some token that would fairly closely match with structures exposed by datasets, which would be published by a data catalog. We actually have a project that works on that, so we may want to talk afterwards.
What's the project name?
Resource Registry, Earthcube Resource Registry.
Okay.
And also Data Discovery Studio, where we have a large catalog of data sets. And from each of them, we can launch a Jupyter notebook. Ideally, we would launch appropriate notebooks based on the type of data that is exposed, if we can match it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some rudimentary mechanism for matching, but that depends on the types of metadata exposed by the registry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about how to align that better, because it would be nice to be able to launch your notebooks.
That'd be great. Yeah, let's do that. Go ahead. I have a question about the data catalog.
Data Discovery Studio, or
your data catalog?
Yes, our project is called Data Discovery Studio, and it has about 1.6 or 1.7 million geoscience-related data sets.
Okay, that answers my question.
Enhanced metadata, right? And from each of these data sets, you can launch Jupyter on multiple hubs. Well, okay. There's a poster about that. My last question, hopefully, I wouldn't promise it's the last one, is so you followed LTR vocabularies. Have you looked at software ontology, SWO, for a potential source of software functions? Because the set of tasks that you list is a fairly controversial list. Different sets of tasks would be proposed by different communities, and what SWO tried to do is to distill those that would be sort of community blind. And then at the second level, there will be tasks attached to specific types of data.
Okay.
Have you considered somehow aligning your vocabularies for tasks with that?
We will have to do that. It sounds like that second level of task is really what to align with, but the kind of agnostic or what have you, well, I guess tasks are, but the functionality, having that information, I could see how that would definitely be useful, or one would want to discover and search along those sorts of facets. Did you catch that?
The software ontology. I looked and looked and never found the software ontology when we were trying to develop this. So
SWO?
okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, we'll have to do that.
I'm not sure.
What's that?
I think Yolanda tried to align OntoSoft with that, but I'm not sure how close.
Okay, thank you.
Just listening to your talk made me think about some programs that some students have written for cleaning their data, and I've recommended that they put it in GitHub or some repository, and so and I recommended either the LTR GitHub or EDI GitHub, but it makes me think that like some of these things could go into the registry, these from students and not necessarily from IMs. Is that an appropriate place for some of these? Because I'm thinking of one particular one that is a pretty sophisticated cleaning package for time series data, and it could actually probably be further developed. It's gotten to a point, and there's opportunities to further develop it. And it seems like, would that be appropriate for this registry?
Yeah, great question. I think so. I think that it sounds like it kind of borders a little bit on that fourth item, handling non-generalized code, and how do we want to do this sort of thing. But it also sounds like that it is a very useful piece of code that has been maturing, and I don't know if they're looking for collaborators to kind of take it that last mile, or to find out how to. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we are, yeah, but useful, but potentially useful to others. And So I think maybe we save that for this fourth activity here and kind of explore that a bit. But yeah, that's something that we're definitely consider to be within the scope of this project for sure.
And then how do you identify those? Because I'm sure there's a lot of those out there.
Yeah, so depending, again, by task or, if we start bringing in data types, however the information aligns with the ontology. But so is your question more of like, how do you find these like production ready, mature software packages, and how do you find these kind of, loose collections of code that perform a particular task?
Right. It seems like the code registry is sort of starting from scratch and creating these things where there are already some that already exist. And those people that have developed those are not associated with, necessarily your group, or they've moved on from LTR, or and so it's like there's things out there on the GitHub that you just have to come across by being lucky in your search query.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess it's an education thing, and how do we promote bringing tools together and into a means that we can find them and use them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are kind of starting from scratch because we weren't able to find a suitable resource for kind of the scope that we were after. Just to be clear, this resource is not a repository for software. It's not like a GitHub or a Zenodo or anything like that. It's merely just a curated list of software that we find useful or that we think others may find useful for these particular tasks. And if you go in, which I'll be asking you to do a little bit later, you can see that on that first piece of information that you're presented with when you click on a software item is a link to the resource, like to the GitHub in which all the code lives, or wherever it happens to be that you can download it from. So it's very just kind of high level information. We're not curating, we're not archiving code and preserving it and asking people to develop within our space. It's very distributed, and we did that purposefully.
But it's important when we have a session here to learn about these things, to get the community involved, to hear about those kinds of packages that may be out there. There is no way for us to discover them unless we hear about them. And that's why I think this registry is so important, to kind of pull them all together there. So, but I guess we'll get there when we'll talk about that non-generalized code, right?
Yeah.
Suzanne kept asking questions that I wasn't sure you were answering.
Real quick comment to Corinna's comment. A lot of these things are kind of hard to find. Right now, we're going kind of from the top down. We're looking at all the production ready software that's out there because that's the logical place to start, exposing all that through this registry, and then digging in deeper and like really getting a feel for other unique things that are out there. Or maybe there's there are communities we could kind of tap into and listen to, or bring in and engage with, that can bring these sorts of things to light, these dark code, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, Colin, so I just want to place additional emphasis on these recent comments. This, like what you're calling non-generalized code, seems to me almost like the single most important issue that we should be, I'd put that at the top of the list, really. There's just no other mechanism that I'm aware of for finding code like what Suzanne just mentioned. And I realize we may not want to get in a situation where you have so much that it's impossible to find anything just because you're overwhelmed with little snippets of Python or something. We'll have to think about that. But I mean, this really is the kind of resource to handle those, the best resource I can think of to handle those kinds of things. The other thing is, I just kind of go into the site that I haven't looked at for a while, and I kind of have a good sense of all the things that you've described here because I've been involved with this project for a while. But you know, the site itself is pretty sparse. I think we need to think about wrapping this in a more informative package that describes what we're doing here than before any like official launch, rather than just sending someone to imcr.ontosoft.org. Maybe that could be through the EDI website or something, but it needs a little more. We need more, you know, than just like sending folks to, when we get there to this landing page.
Great, thanks for those comments. Yeah, the just kind of loose collection of non-generalized code and all that stuff that's out there. I'm not, we decided to go kind of from the top, work from the top down, because sending, if you have somebody that's you know, not a non-coding expert and someone that's looking for a tool that works, that's been tested, is production ready, that's what you want to send them to first. But I totally agree with the points that that you are all making regarding the non-generalized code and the utility in that.
Right, but maybe we should, maybe a first step is to actually think about what that word means or what that threshold is. Because like, for example, I'm looking through here, and we've just been talking about this earlier in some of the other IMs about GIS data. There's a tool in here that converts FGDC to EML. I'd call that non-generalized, although it's already in here. And most of the IMs I know could never get it to work, including myself. So, you know, I'm not sure where this threshold is of like non-generalized versus established or whatever we're calling it. I'm not sure about that. I don't know quite what that means.
I think, well, what does that mean? It's a good question. And yeah, I think it can be a little bit blurry, but I would say that it's the difference between a production ready software library and not. Something that does what it says it does, that works, you know, you don't encounter any issues when you install it, etc., versus then everything else, which is, and everything else is very valuable. Definitely recognize that. Whatever you see.
I guess a segue to the previous comment, it would be very important to scope this project tightly so that you only describe the software of a particular kind. Let's say you're looking only at libraries or something that could be installed with pip install, or with something that could be run in RStudio, and not looking at everything else, because there are certainly lots of components that may exist on websites and will do some data conversion and data transformation. You need, I guess, it would be important to decide whether you want to include those or you want only to stay with the libraries. Also, when you, I would sort of disagree with the statement that there are no registries of such tools. There are many, but they kind of don't show up, cannot be found easily. At the last ESIP, there was a very interesting effort reported, you know, Ben Galevsky and others from NCSA. They scraped GitHub for projects, ended up with, I don't know, 1 million, I don't know the exact number, of Jupyter notebooks and other software pieces that they just, I believe this were Jupyter notebooks. So they just saved JSONs in a database, and that could be an alternative to doing all of that manually. Of course, manually you have a lot more control, and you can figure out which tags to assign to your project, and which is often non-trivial, because when you have a library, you can scrape all the functions and try to match these functions with the terms that you have in your controlled vocabulary, and that may work in some cases. But if you scrape all the function calls, that will give you a very broad set of functions, as opposed to you have some monolithic software that may not expose everything as code, but would actually do a lot of useful things. So that's another argument for scoping it tightly, perhaps to libraries that can be scraped for at least method names, which you may be able to interpret. And another activity that was done, like,
real quick, the name of that effort, or who was involved in that effort?
Ben Galevsky from NCSA. He's the guy who knows everything about it. His name is Ben. That's I sure. I'm not sure about the last name. I think
Ben.
Galevsky. Anybody knows him? Well, anyway, I'll give you the information.
It sounds like a great way to handle these,
right, and
otherwise distributed and non-collated.
It was reported at the last ECIP, and there was a session about it in DC. Another effort that was sort of related within one of EarthCube projects was to catalog infrastructure components that can be chained together. And these are not necessarily codes, libraries. This could be any infrastructure components. And there is a Google spreadsheet with about 700 items in it. So some of that may belong here. Yeah. If hopefully you're not going as far as cataloging models, because that would be another can of worms. Yeah. Right. So that's another argument for trying to keep the scope very tight for what you're trying to catalog, and I think that will make your product much more valuable if people know what belongs here and what they should not expect to find.
The system chaining project, that analysis, who did that? The latter.
The EarthCube, yeah, I did that. Yeah. So that was one of EarthCube conceptual design project called Geoscience Enterprise Architecture for Research.
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, to take our discussion in a different direction, I appreciate that you guys are really targeting smaller teams who I imagine might not have the resources to send people to meetings like this. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how to reach out to smaller teams as opposed to bigger teams.
So, well, that's the first thing that comes to mind is kind of the scope of our project, the EDI project anyway, and we kind of do that. That's one of our emphasis, one thing we emphasize. So reaching out to them with the purpose of letting them know about this resource, or bringing them into these larger meetings like ECIP, and being able to leverage that expertise, or
you could start with the first step of letting them know about the resources that are available, and even kind of setting their mindset into information management in the first place. A lot of those folks are sort of stressed out and really stretched thin, and they don't have the time and the mind space to think about these things.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, we have a couple of things that we do via EDI. We sponsor a help desk at ESA, and so that's a place where there are 6 organizations that collaborate, and people routinely just walk up and say, what's this all about? And so part of that help desk is just to make people aware of what resources are available. So that'll be an important place to advertise it. And we do something similar at AGU as well. And I imagine as part of our advertising campaign, we'll reach out via Ecolog and a lot of different listservs, including the ECIP listserv, And then hopefully word of mouth if it becomes something that's really useful to people.
Twitter and yeah, usual.
I wonder if there's would be any value in reaching out in smaller, more regional sort of one-day meetings. Okay, sorry. I was just saying that I wonder if there could be value in reaching out in smaller, more regional meetings. Yeah, we can talk about that, but lots of smaller meetings that are very regionally focused. And
So like perhaps like a meetup group in a town or something like that, like our meetup or.
okay.
No, not yet, but that's a great, I mean, that's a great idea. To
So-
look for those opportunities regionally specific that you can tap into. Probably in our case, we would call into, have a host like a presentation or something like
Right.
that.
So I was thinking of, for example, the Gulf of Maine has a bunch of sort of associations and groups of smaller fuel stations that they have they have small meetings, but one-day meetings in Portland once a year. Thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We hadn't considered that as a possibility. We should talk more and get this on, in black and white so we can.
What we also need is for these kinds of meetings, what is the percentage of data managers there? Are there any? Is that science meetings? Are there any people who would be interested in this information? I mean, we can't just go to a field station meeting and expect that anybody's interested in this.
Right. Yeah, so finding out that information would be critical to deciding to allocate resources to go and physically go there. But, if it's something that we could remotely participate in, the cost is much less. And also recognizing, yes, information managers are important and we need to target them, but there is also just the regular information management tasks that scientists in general, everyone's kind of confronted with. Takes up 70% of our time or whatever that value is. So that's a really good point about identifying where the opportunities are and the composition of those groups so that we can really hone in and target the delivery of information. And yeah, that's gonna be a challenge and something to be aware of. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other general comments before just kind of smashing through these activities really quick? Got about half an hour left.
It does seem like an easy place to get a little bit of exposure would be to put it in the Science Gateways catalog of the different available, basically, registries of different things for science.
Great. What? Science Gateways. Is that an ESIP?
Science Gateways community, it's either initiative or institute, has a catalog of different registries and repositories of different types of tools for different types of science needs. It would give you like a little exposure. I don't know how much reach they actually have, but it is somewhere that could be interesting to put it or get some support. They also have lots of support for these gateways infrastructure and thinking through different tasks.
Mm-hmm. But for now, it would be great if you guys can kind of convene maybe into two small groups, maybe the people on this side and then the people on this side just kind of get together, go through the different questions in the notes document here and just kind of collectively just start answering these things. Maybe we'll have enough time here at the end to report out, but if not, at least your ideas and thoughts will be distilled in this document and we can follow up or just use the information as is. So have at it. And thank you in advance. We could, how about we take the last, I mean, that's a question that's being posed here in this document. And as a group, I'd like you to consider the important facets of that and log that in the notes document. And then at the end, maybe we take 5 minutes or a little bit more, depending on where you guys are, to chat about your particular recommendations. Right. Right. Yeah.
I think we've always kind of envisioned this as being sort of above this stack exchange questions and codes.
Wasn't sure what you wanted cite for the.
Oh, yeah, that's, oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh, so somebody online? There is one.
Yeah, an important question. I think there's many important questions in here that we really need feedback on. So I'd like to get not just talking about generalized code, but some of these other things. So yes, please address these, especially the one that Corinne is bringing up. Maybe that's the first one we address. We start from the bottom and go up. And then we convene at the end if we have a few moments to do that. That'd be great. And it looks like we have a smaller group, so maybe now just everybody together, just, okay. So we're doing this as a group now? Is that what the suggestion is? Okay, let's go, let's start with handling non-generalized code. And Kristen, you'll be logging these notes? And Kristen's working in a different document, not the one that's there, not the live document. So if, or it's not necessary because you're capturing it.
People get different ideas, so. Writing and talking, so.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yes, Stephen.
So I was thinking, I'm gonna keep using Suzanne's students. Oh, sorry. Suzanne just like asked this so eloquently, it works perfectly. I'm gonna use her students as an example. I can't recall the functionality here. Could her students go to this site? If Suzanne knew about this resource and she directed to them, could they register that software themselves that they developed?
Yes, they can.
Okay. So you don't have to do it. That's critically important.
Yeah, and we have some little best practices document to guide them through that. Like if you're filling out this field, please use this controlled vocabulary, or and really highlighting the important and core fields, not the whole completing the extensive ontology metadata.
But they couldn't upload the code to this site. They would need to upload it somewhere else, or?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we're merely linking to wherever the code happens to exist, which commonly is GitHub or some other location.
I'm just gonna keep talking. So Corinne, I like your comment about this is not Stack Overflow. It's not for questions. It's not a code snippet. So it seems like at least one kind of minimum criterion is that it has to do something. It has to have a purpose. And as you said, it works. It actually at least works on the test suite that whoever developed it in.
And
who makes that decision?
Right.
The submitter, but that's what it gets. Like Colin can't, like a group can't do all this. It has to come down to the submitter.
Yeah. So one idea here. Okay, so this is gets into kind of organizing the contents, and this could be done in a few ways. One, we could stand up a separate registry for such code. So it'd be like IMCR2 or whatever.
Why?
Why? Because then you don't have everything in the kitchen sink in one place, and you can more accurately identify what it is that you're looking for. An alternative might be to add a few terms to the controlled vocabulary that qualify it as its, its state of development. Is it a production ready library, or is it something else? And something, just with a couple simple terms, you could then filter your search results accordingly. Like generally, I mean, personally speaking, I'm not interested in, everything in the kitchen sink. I'm just, want the kitchen sink. So that's another way we could maybe implement and facilitate these things.
I don't know about 2. I'd have to think about 2. That's yeah.
I think a filter, like a term that seems it would be like a pretty easy way to go about it.
No, I don't think another registry would be a good idea, but we do have to think about how not to kind of overwhelm the system with crap. And and that can turn into a fair amount of work. But maybe we need to get there first before it becomes, or until it becomes work, serious work. I mean, if somebody suggests a piece of code every 2 months, then Colin can take a look at it and say, oh, okay, yeah, it's good enough. Yeah.
But it sounds like there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of code that exist out there in the wild that kind of fit within the scope of what it is that you guys are talking about. Yeah, certainly. But it sounds like harvesting them is a good, it sounds like harvesting that information would be a good thing to do, or leveraging the harvests that other people have done.
Yeah.
So it does, my immediate impression, at least from after, the conversations that we've had today, is that there is a lot of that out there, and that is an overwhelming amount of work to curate in a meaningful way.
I think the other thing that Ilya brought up was that your scope needs to determine how much of this harvesting you're doing. Are you harvesting everything? Are you harvesting everything that has the word data management in it? Like, I think that defining your scope, it helps get rid of some of the clutter, but also helps you figure out who should be giving you code.
Mm-hmm. And so if both of these, if everything in the kitchen sink is in one place, we will define our scope appropriately and provide mechanisms by which you can navigate that ocean of software.
So I think one approach would be to just link to that kitchen sink. So if somebody else has harvested everything from GitHub, then all this one would do is, okay, and here is everything else. And as time permits, somebody could start going through and maybe sifting a little better.
Great idea. Yeah. Yeah, that's
Friday afternoon, 2 hours, take a look at this kitchen sink kind of deal and try to figure out if you can pull out something that is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we can very quickly build up a very quickly build up a set of algorithms to harvest that information and populate it now that we have and know how to use the API. Just here it is in this GitHub repository, transfer that information over here. So yeah, manually going through and searching, sifting and winnowing through all that information, may be a possibility that could be expedited with some programmatic means.
It's somewhere online, it's somewhere online, that whole harvest out of GitHub. What kind of, no.
Some database that
Ben has it.
But there's utility. It sounds like there's general agreement that there is utility in this sort of information, this scale of or state of code.
Yeah, the other the Google spreadsheet that I mentioned with 700 pieces, that is online.
But that is somewhat curated already, right? No, not really.
Should I?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so the date is really, really, really important. I think that'll be the most important filter. Kind of everything that's all over 5 years is just going to be dropped.
Well, not necessarily, because you could have a stable piece of software.
So this sounds really cool, but just to clarify, we're actually talking about doing this harvesting for this resource as well? Yeah.
I do think this needs to be annotated a little better.
Yeah,
I don't want to see everything.
but I agree. And, one thing about people uploading their own materials versus harvesting is the very fact that you have to take the time to upload it versus just going and scraping. I mean, that in itself is almost going to, provide a filter and a level of quality in itself. So I think you got to be careful about harvesting versus letting Suzanne's students upload their stuff.
But they're gone.
Right. Well, I know we're a line in the sand, right? There's a line in the sand here.
Yeah, certainly. I think distilling the functionality, as you've alluded to, would be very, very useful. And yeah, interesting to make those comparisons. But it sounds like it. Any more discussion on this topic? Non-generalized code. I think we got a lot of useful information out of this and some recommendations on how to proceed and considerations that we should make. Are there any more contributions people would like to bring forward? Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I do think he's more, I think he needs a different environment for it as well.
Right, right. Yeah, so that's something we took note on, wrapping it in a website type of thing that is a little bit more human approachable and friendly. Yeah. Yeah, certainly, certainly. Yeah. Oh. Sorry.
One more. So two suggestions. One, I mentioned already that if you can show utility if from let's say data discovery interface, you can launch the software that is in your registry. That will be immediate demonstration that and sort of encouragement for people to contribute more to your registry, because then when they discover data, they will immediately see what code will operate on this data. that would be the ultimate
Great.
goal and the ultimate use case. But then there is sort of a half of step towards that goal. And an example is Nitric system which was developed for neuroscience and a collection of neuroscience tools that operate on certain types of neuroscience data. Let's say three-dimensional volumes of image brain images and stuff like that. So there are several types of data, and you can search for tools based on the MIME type or type of data set. If you add MIME types here, it may be an easy match with something that would come from a data registry. NITRC.
Yeah, MIME types. Great.
So just a comment. So I think that non-generalized code are non-generalized just because they are not general. Well, of course, but I think that the challenge of reusing non-generalized code is that it's so specific. And there are lots of time that you cannot really just copy and paste or just replace some really
Sorry, what questions? Okay, so if I understand correctly, it's in some sense a learning opportunity for whoever wants to use it, right? Like yeah. I mean, that's probably like the first 3 years of software development that I did was just like trying to find how to do things with other people's code and like patch it all together, and or if there was a routine, go look at that routine and learn from that. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, yeah, that's a utility, definitely a utility of these sorts of code. Should be able to do that in maybe 3 Fridays. Yeah, that's. So you could scrape for something else, which would probably be on a similar order of magnitude, it sounds like. Yes. Oh yeah, yeah.
My question has to do with these non-generalized code, and it seems like at the start to making it generalized, right? If somebody's written something to do something specific, but something that other people want to do with their data, I mean, isn't that what GitHub is all about? Is you take that and you fork it and you do something else with it? Does that become generalized, would it become a new repository? Or I guess I don't understand that part. But it seems to me that the non-generalized code is only a starting place for something that can become more generalized.
I'm just having a very, very hard time to draw some impact on that. So I just wrote an article to convert our quantity data into the Boolean format. So it's probably something that most LPRs like can take a look at and say, oh, that's how to do it, and I'll do it this way. And then a whole bunch of others say, oh, I'll do it in Python rather than R. And so that becomes a collection. But it is extremely specific. I mean, that R script only went with my data, probably. And so I'm not sure if that would belong into something like this or if not. So right now, it resides with the transformed data in the MEDI repository. So anybody can go there and see, oh, this is how she did it. So I'm having a very hard time finding this. What goes, what doesn't.
In my mind, that's exactly the kind of thing that would go into this repository because it's an example. I know it wouldn't run right on my data right away, but I could easily hack it and save myself probably a lot of time trying to figure it out myself.
So maybe there is another step in there that we as an LPR community start this GitHub with all of these. So,
Yeah, related to this climate question, right? Yeah.
so everything about climate,
Mm-hmm.
every different way each site is doing this transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we register that whole GitHub here with climate.
Yeah, that would seem to be like a logical unit, but I would also see what Suzanne has to offer as another logical unit. And for that, I would suggest that there would be, well, maybe for all of these, an input data set and an output. So a user could see what they have to operate on and what they'll get. You look skeptical. Okay.
Yeah. But could be distilled into their GitHub repository. That, I mean, you just have your test data or example data set in there with the code, and it is that GitHub repository then goes in here. And then Corinna, what you bring up, I think, is a great way to organize this rather than having, because it's kind of scoped around a particular issue, and there is a lot of variation in how that can be handled. A good intermediary step would be a place to collect these things. That's a good point. I like that idea. We are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you all very much for being here today and providing this valuable feedback. Hopefully it's not going to be a year from now that we go live with this thing. We'd really like to get this out into the community and operating, but there are some serious considerations that we need to make in light of the comments brought forward. And thank you very much for doing that. And
If you have a chance, please do search through and see how it works.
yeah, thank you everybody. Appreciate it.